The last session of this season has been planned to leave a fascinating impression on of the festival in your minds. Aftab Seth's memoir, A Diplomat's Garden, celebrates his garden by counting the flowers that grow, rather than by the leaves that fall. It offers a glimpse into the life of an Indian diplomat, filled with action and excitement. The author's ancestry and upbringing are a blend of the plural strands of India's races, religion, and culture. His education in three countries reinforced this liberal, cosmopolitan, and trusting heritage, which is the backdrop for unfolding of a diplomat's life in 8 different countries. He spent his career caught up in the Lebanese civil war, carrying secret messages between Benazir Bhutto and Rajiv Gandhi, dining with Japanese royalty, visiting ailing Greek prime ministers in hospitals. The chair of the session is one of the most distinguished foreign officers of India, Shyam Saran. After a career spanning 34 years in the Indian Foreign Services, Saran was appointed India's Foreign Secretary in 2004 and held that position till his retirement from services in September 2006. He currently helms the India International Center and also guides the Center for Policy Research. In conversation with our author is India's foremost sociologist and public intellectual, Dipankar Gupta, whose column gives us a unique sight into the way contemporary India thinks. He has argued that modernity is not about technology and consumption, but about attitudes, especially those that come into play in our social relations. According to Professor Gupta, the past clings tenaciously to our present. Traditional India thrives in contemporary locales. Over to you, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. And let me welcome all of you to this, the last but not the least of the sessions that we have had over these 2 days at this Value of Words. I think we could start the proceedings by launching the book, if that is okay. Yeah. So let's do the honors. Okay, we have more or less a full house. That's very encouraging. Let me Diplomat Aftab. The chair at these kind of sessions is usually the reigning deity, who is supposed to, park himself on a pedestal and then let the proceedings, start, commence. With people who are much more knowledgeable, much more articulate than the chair is. So without any further ado, I will hand over the mic to Dipankar and ask him to, converse with Aftab. You have the floor.
As the chair, you can do anything. Thank you very much. Thank you indeed. I'm very happy to be here and be in conversation with Aftab Seth. Interestingly enough, I was introduced as Professor Gupta, and he was introduced as Aftab Seth. So as they say, the great bard is known as Shakespeare, not Mr. Shakespeare. So I think it sits very well with you, and you too, Shyam. You all know about Aftab's brilliant career and his many talents. He's a diplomat, yes, but he has other features too. For example, he's a very good, not just a speaker, as an actor. He hosted television programs in the early days when people didn't know about it. Mirror of the World, right? Mirror of the World was hosted by him, one of the earliest programs on television. And did a great job from all the reviews that you might have read about it. But what surprises me most is that Aftab Seth says his happiest days were in Patna. Now, how could one's happiest days be in Patna? It's not California, it's not Switzerland, but Patna. I'm quite surprised to hear this, to learn about this, but I want him to tell us what was it in Patna that made his days so happy and cheerful.
Thank you, Dipankar. The short answer to your question is, what made Patna the happiest years of my life up to the age of, say, 10, was my family, number one. A well-knit, composite family that represented in itself the plural strains of India and beyond India. And the street that we lived was a microcosm of India as we knew it. A trusting, plural, composite India with a wide range of people belonging to every religion, every race. We had English people, Anglo-Indians, Jains, Buddhists, Protestants, Roman Catholics, Shia Muslims and Sunni Muslims, all living in that one short space of about half a mile at the most, which was Bank Road, where your own family lived as our next door neighbors, Gupta. So it was a very well-knit family, a well-knit society. And it was a loving, trusting, supportive environment in which we grew up. Hence, I call it the happiest days. Yeah. Not that the other days were unhappy, but those, I suppose we all of us tend to idealize our childhood. That's really what it was.
But did this realization come to you afterwards? At what point did you really sort of appreciate the fact that you were living in such a multicultural society where you were imbibing all these influences? At that time, you were far too young to see the import of it all.
Quite right. I was too young to see the import of it and the wider significance of it. But as I grew up and traveled to different countries to study, to visit my parents in the Middle East, in Indonesia, and so on, I realized that the manner in which we had been brought up gave me the ability, the privilege, I should say, to appreciate, understand, and absorb the best influences of other cultures and other peoples.
Just to fill you in, Aftab has in him a very wide gene pool. He has Khatri Punjabi, Welsh Protestant, and Bihari Muslim. You can't leave Biharis out. So he has all these in him, and more, perhaps, which we don't know too much about. But the interesting part
Don't forget that with my wife, I have Sikh, second Guru Angad, the descendant of. So I have Sikhism very much in my family. Beyond the three that you mentioned, that's the fourth. So our children are a wonderful product of this rich mix of India's best. The best of religions, the best of races.
Well, anyway, his Welsh grandmother believed the Welsh are the best because the English and the Scottish and the Irish have other strains in them. They have the French blood and Saxon blood, right? And she felt that as a Welsh, she was a real representative of the British Isle. But tell me something else. That is, your background being what it is, and the way you grew up in Patna and later in school and college in Delhi University. In what ways did you find it, helpful to you in your diplomatic career?
My background?
Yeah.
For the same reason as I mentioned before, that my exposure in my own home, in my own street, and in the society in which we lived, the countries that I visited as a child because of my parents, and the country that I visited as a student, that's Japan and England, before I joined the service, and some travels in Europe, gave me the ability to appreciate and understand other cultures. And half the job of a diplomat, apart from projecting what we are, what India is to understand the country that you're living in and try and tell people in India about the country that we are living in so that they understand it better.
Your familiarity with Islamic culture tradition, did that help you? I suspect it did from reading the book, but that must have helped you in a posting in Egypt because you were there in very tumultuous times.
Yes, it helped in a way in the sense that I was able to relate to the Grand Sheikh of Al-Azhar. I must clarify, though, that the composite nature of the family didn't mean that we had any religious training. We didn't. It was an understanding. So yes, in Cairo, the Grand Sheikh of Al-Azhar, who is a great Sunni potentate, and he's also the head of a 1,000-year-old university, the Al-Azhar University, the home to many scholars. I was able to relate to him and various other potentates. But Egypt was much more than Islam. Egypt had a deep Pharaonic background. It had a Coptic background, Coptic Christian background, which was very important. The Copts, including Boutros Ghali, Secretary General of the UN, was a Coptic Christian from Egypt. And then it had the Islamic, the third element was the Islamic. And then, of course, the European. So Egypt was a fantastic amalgam of civilizations, a melting pot of civilizations, and a fabulous place to work in, with the most beautiful monuments and a very intelligent and multilingual society. Spoke French, English, and Arabic with equal facility.
You did start 2 journals in Egypt, didn't you? Sorry? Didn't you start 2 journals in...
No, the journals were started before I came, Sawt al-Hind and Sawt al-Sharq. They were there beyond, and part of my job was to keep those 2 journals going. Yeah.
What hasn't been mentioned so far is that Aftab excelled in practically every examination he sat for. He was #1 in history in BA in Delhi University, which is not an easy job at all. It's a fiercely competitive position. Then he came 2nd or 3rd in the IFS, say number 2 in the IFS, first in the IFS, and he also got a gold medal for Japanese, didn't you?
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Now with all these acclaims, how did you manage to lead a rather quiet life as a bureaucrat?
Well, all the academic excellence, and all of us have been academically excellent. Shyam Saran is another great, brilliant student. But academic excellence doesn't take you very far in the Foreign Service, except that it helps you give an intellectual depth to the work that you're doing. It helped me to write books. Even while I was in service, I published a book of poetry, and while I was ambassador in Japan, I was asked to write a book about Japanese history, which I did. It helps you, it gives you a little intellectual depth, as I said. It gives you an ability to deal with other intellectuals, with professors.
You also wrote about India's influence in Indonesia, didn't you?
I did. That was while I was in Indonesia. I wrote 2 papers. One was the comparative study of Indian and Indonesian culture. And the other was a paper that I wrote on the very peculiar aspects of Islam in Indonesia, which is quite different from the Islam that we know in many other countries of the world. So I wrote a fairly detailed paper on that.
So if
Not published, of course, because it was not meant for publication in those days.
So Aftab, if you had not come first in the IFS, what would have been your fallback career? Would you have been an author, a poet, a theatre person, or something else?
Well, the chair has answered the question. Well, you know, if I hadn't got into the IFS, I probably would have ended up as a babu in the IAS in some part of the world. I didn't have any particular desire to go into the world of business, nor particularly into the world of academics. I wanted to be in a job where I could do things with my hands, with my mind, whatever.
But you write so well, and you have poetry, you know, a talent towards poetry. May I just read out one sentence here?
Yes, please.
This is about the waters of the Nile from his book. The color of the crystal clear water of the Mediterranean of Sidi Abdel Rahman and Al Alamein was a stunning turquoise blue, turning azure as we waded into deeper waters. Now that is really quite a poetic way of putting things across. But what beats that is this. This is about his grandmother in her dying bed. And he writes here that though Alice, his grandmother, his Welsh grandmother, had lived nearly 30 years as a widow, as she lay dying aged 93, murmured through her lips, by then quite blue, and heard clearly by her son Adolphus and others around, was a name she called her husband Sayyid. As she repeatedly murmured his name, she rubbed the gold wedding ring on her finger, a gesture of a devoted love that spanned 2 religions, 2 continents, and 1 century. I mean, isn't that wonderful? Yeah. And so I have no doubt that though you may have wanted to be a babu, you may have ended up as a poet laureate.
Well, yes. This is a scene that I was not personally witness to, but it was reported to me afterwards, and I was not in the least surprised, because my grandmother, whom you call Welsh, actually her mother's side was Welsh, the English side was Anglo-Saxon. But she was loved by us grandchildren unreservedly. She was a great raconteur. She told wonderful stories. She read great poetry. I think our dramatic talent or our ability to appreciate and write poetry comes from there. So it was a person whom we loved very much and who was a great influence in our lives, our young lives. And therefore, when this scene was repeated to me, I thought it worthy of the book to put it in.
No, it's very, very evocative and moving. And you know what I liked a lot about your book, and I wasn't really expecting it, because most bureaucrats, when they write their autobiographies, it's all about themselves and the great things they've done and about the diplomatic or official maneuvers they've made. But your book was very different, because there's so much in it about cultural exchange between countries. And he seems to have enjoyed that a lot more than commercial negotiations and things like that. And everywhere he went, it was about getting artists from India, even taking artists from abroad to India. For example, the mandolin orchestra
from Germany.
From Hamburg. You brought that to India. And this kind of cultural exchange really enlivens relationship between countries much more enduringly than diplomatic forays. What do you think?
Yes, I always tended to be more interested in that, I must say, and I probably neglected.
But let me interrupt.
Yeah.
I don't think much of that would have happened without Paula's presence. I'm absolutely convinced about that. Her contribution in that area must have been very significant, and you couldn't have ever ignored that.
No, you're absolutely right. She was there at every step of the way, and many of the pictures in the book, you will see her with the president's wife, Jahan Sadat, with the vice president, Hosni Mubarak's wife, Susan Mubarak, right then in our young days. And you will see her at every step of the way in the book with all the presidents, prime ministers, their wives, kings, queens, emperors, empresses. She's always there at every step. Yes, that is very true. But to come back to your question about the cultural thing, yes, we took some of the best poets also, quite apart from the mandolin orchestra. Indonesia's best known poet, a very rebellious man called Rendra, whom you know from your time in Jakarta as ambassador. We sent Rendra twice to India for poetry festivals. We sent one of Egypt's greatest painters, a woman, Inji Iflatun, who belonged to a great Pasha family, but like many people who were born rich, was a devoted communist and was hence, we know many in India, like M.N. Roy and Mohit Sen and so on, who were born in rich families but were devoted communists. We know the great three in Britain, the Cambridge Four. So the Rendra was also a great iconoclast whom we sent. And Inji Iflatun was sent to jail by Nasser because of her communism. But she was a pasha. She spoke French, English, Arabic, dripping like water from her mouth. She was a wonderful woman, so we sent her to India. And she came back and painted the most beautiful watercolors inspired by India. We sent Shiko Munakata, the best Japanese woodblock printer, and Taro Okamoto, who was a great painter from Japan to India, and they came back to Japan and they painted what they saw about India. We sent a wonderful poet, Swan Sang, who had translated Kalidas into Vietnamese. We sent him to India, and he came back and wrote poems about Banaras and the Ganga. So, of course, we had Sonal Mansingh, and we had Leela Samson, and we had all the great Sitakant Mahapatra, and the great poets from India, the great dancers from India, and the great painters, Vivan Sundaram, Bhupen Kakkar, the whole lot coming to us abroad, and we arranged exhibitions for them. So the cultural part was two ways: bringing India to whichever country we were in and taking that country to India. It was two ways.
Yes, and did you really feel palpably the effect this had in your diplomacy?
Yes, I think so, because certainly my ambassadors that I served, I had wonderful ambassadors. I had Ashok Chib, one of the great Arabists and one of the greatest experts in our country on Pakistan, having served there and having looked after Pakistan from the ministry, who was very supportive and who himself was a painter. So he understood clearly the value of the cultural work that we were doing. The ambassadors I had in Germany, where I was Consul General in Hamburg, Ishi Rehman, an eccentric, but a man of great charm and intelligence, which he hid under his eccentricity. I had wonderful Professor Ali Muhammad Khosrow, Vice Chancellor of Aligarh University, amongst other things, and a great economist. And I had Ram Sathe, who had been Consul General in Hamburg 20 years before me, all very supportive. So I had the support. I had S.K. Singh in Islamabad, who I must say that even in Islamabad, with all the rigors of Zia's regime, we still managed to get Kiran Sehgal to come and dance in the India House, and I never heard the end of it because I was told I had smuggled in a dancer for Republic Day, and I said, what the hell do you think she was going to come and do on Republic Day? Not hoist the flag. Obviously, Kiran Sehgal was coming there to dance. And we sent Shima Kirmani, a great dancer, a very intrepid, brave girl, who had learned Bharatnatyam from the Bharatiya Kala Kendra in Delhi under Leela Samson and others. We sent her to India. So even in Pakistan, we had Rajendra Prasanna, the great Shehnai and flute player, coming to us. We had Rita Ganguly, the great singer, coming to us in India House. So even with all the rigors of Zia's Pakistan and the difficulties under which we flourished, had to not flourish, had to exist, our cultural work never stopped, even there. So, and of course,
Culture must have been a great bridge in that case.
it was very much appreciated by the Muhajir community of Karachi. Muhajir meaning the refugee community, people from Bihar, UP, Hyderabad, who missed their old homes in India, and for whom my distinguished predecessor, Mani Shankar, and I did much to improve the visa systems that we had in our mission, to make sure that he used to do 300 visas a day in Mani's time. I improved the systems even further, and we had 500 people given visas a day, apply in the morning, take the passport in the evening. So these things, this is people-to-people diplomacy. Of course, I dealt with General Jahandad Khan, the Lieutenant Governor, Ghaus Ali Shah, the Chief Minister. I dealt even with Ziaul Haq as president. He came to our house for Republic Day and spent time in our house having tea with my wife and me. But apart from dealing with the leaders, it was with the people of Karachi in Pakistan and in interior Sindh and in Balochistan that we really enjoyed our time together.
Well, tell us about the meeting you had in Balochistan.
The meeting, yes. Balochistan, of course, the capital is Quetta, as you know, and Balochistan consists of many tribes and many communities. It is not one uniform whole, and one of the leading tribes there is the Bukti tribe. And the head of the Buktis was a man called Nawab Akbar Khan Bukti, who was a man 6'8", with a huge beard, tall, strapping Baloch, and he was violently opposed to the military regime of Ziaul Haq. So he lived in a little street, and my wife and my young little daughter, she was 12 then, we were invited to lunch at his place, and there's a great dastakhan on the thing laid out in his room, and we all sat on the floor, and the only two women there were my wife and my daughter. They were all men of different types there at the thing.
Different types?
Different, yet different tribes and of different professions. There were lawyers and professors and others. And at the lunch, of course, Nawab Akbar Khan Bukti told us a lot about what they suffer under the military regime. And then he picked up a piece of chicken and offered it to my daughter, saying, "Would you like a piece of Zia's head?" So my daughter was quite taken aback, and I don't think she was able to eat her lunch after that, because she probably thought that there was some kind of brain in that wretched plate. But actually, he was only joking. So he was a very powerful man, and ultimately General Musharraf had him shot in the hills of Balochistan where he was hiding. But he would come frequently to our home in Karachi, take out his pistol, put it on the peg table next to him, and then say, "Now, Consul General, you can offer me my whiskey." So then he would have his whiskey, and he'd sit in the far end of the drawing room where he could watch the door. And he says, "I've been trained since I killed my first man at the age of 11. I've been trained to sit with my eyes to the door. So now you can bring me my whiskey."
And you have the eyes to the door.
That's the door. I'm watching it, as you see.
Yes, you speak so glowingly of your bosses, which is really very nice to hear, because most of us we crib about our colleagues and boss. And you had S.K. Singh, you mentioned, Chib, you mentioned. Quello was probably your first boss, wasn't he? You had a very good relationship with all of them, and they did help you out. But I think there must have been something in you that brought out the best in them, and this friendship must have developed, and especially when Paula was expecting in Beirut, the trauma you went through and your friends, the way they stood by you. I think that particular incident with bullets whizzing and you going to the hospital, maybe you'd like to relate it.
Yes, we've been informed that we have 5 minutes left. So shall I tell you about Beirut? Yes, I can. We landed up on the 15th of August, our Independence Day, but also the day on which Mujibur Rahman and his family were assassinated in Dhaka. And the civil war in Lebanon had already begun and continued to get worse. Most people were evacuated. We couldn't go, neither could SK's wife Manju, because they were both expecting. And so they were not in a position to travel. We had to go through streets lined with a whole lot of gunmen, and ambulances were used very rapidly for carrying guns and weapons, so they were few and far between, but we somehow managed to get an ambulance, though I had been trained by her obstetrician and gynecologist in case of an emergency, how to give birth to our second child. And I was hoping desperately that I wouldn't have to put my recently learned skills to practical use. And fortunately, the wretched ambulance arrived in time, and we were able to go with other gunmen sitting in the ambulance to the hospital, the American University Hospital, which was lined with wounded people on all sides. And this brave girl came through all that unfazed and went into her room. I sat outside, and within a short while, the nurse came out with this baby, the daughter-in-law of Nilima Pandit sitting there, and said, a fair child with curly hair. And she said, oh, like a Lebanese baby, she said. So my daughter, in fact, was born in Lebanon.
I cannot end this session without asking you about Japan. So very quickly, if you don't mind,
Yeah.
you're the recipient of the highest award in Japan. And also, he and Paula became very close to the imperial family, which is a very rare privilege. Most people, when they go there, the kimono crinkles, as it were. Now, how was your relationship with the family? How did you get to be so close to them? Was it your book that you wrote? Was it?
I think the book helped, because when I took Atal Bihari Vajpayee to see the emperor on his visit in December 2001, the emperor actually spoke about the book. And in the talks the previous evenings with Prime Minister Junichiro Koizumi and the delegation, Prime Minister Koizumi, who had read the book, spoke about it several times. So yes, I think the book helped me, because it was written in Japanese, helped me to reach out not only to the imperial family, but to the political leadership of the time. That helped. Also, I think knowing a bit of the language helped, because I was able to speak to them directly. For example, at that dinner with Koizumi, the Prime Minister, and 6 of his cabinet ministers in the speaker's home, where they were cracking ribald jokes and flirting with the geisha who was serving us, and drinking copious quantities of sake and becoming raucous and quite undisciplined as the evening progressed, nattering with them in Japanese all the way and taking part in their dirty jokes. Yes, it did help me to bond.
Well, I think all of you should read this book, because I enjoyed it immensely. And this conversation, I'm sure, must have stoked your imagination as well. As you may have realized, Aftab has a phenomenal memory. It's probably unmatched in my own experience. He even remembers the names and the characteristics of his kindergarten teachers. Can you believe that? So with this kind of memory to support him, I'm not at all surprised that he stood first in history and topped the IFS exam, and I hope he'll remember this occasion as well.
Thank
Thank you, Dipankar. Thank you, Shyam.
Thank you very much. This has been a fascinating conversation, as it was built to be. Let me just end by also perhaps just as diplomatic persuasion into play was the fact that he served under 4 prime ministers, right? Started with Rajiv Gandhi, then we had VP Singh, we had Chandrasekhar, and then finally Narasimha Rao. And reason why I'm mentioning this is that I was in the Prime Minister's office during Chandrasekhar's time and during Narasimha Rao's time. And he was the, our spokesman, official spokesman. And he had to navigate a very rather, a complicated terrain those days. Every day at 4 o'clock, I think, you had a briefing, and not a word must go wrong. And he never failed. I can't remember any occasion where the spokesman had somehow not quite he got it right. So, except one? Yeah. Yes. Yeah, okay, we'll talk about. So, thank you very much, Aftab, and thank you very much, Dipankar, for this absolutely wonderful conversation. And thanks to all of you for being here this afternoon to share this very joyful occasion with
Thank
us.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you for my families here. And our Antara family is very well represented. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ambassadors, Shyam Saran, Aftab Seth, and Dipankar, sir. It has been a real privilege listening to you, sir. I request Hemant K. Arora, former Governor Rotary International and former Chairman CII Uttarakhand State Council, to felicitate the panelists. May I request all of you to wish to purchase a copy of the book to move to the book signing designated area